Welcome into this introduction to Devy Fantasy Football video. My name is Matt Hicks, the FF Educator. I love Devy Fantasy Football. I write about Devy Fantasy Football. I make videos about Devy Fantasy Football. And I want to bring more folks into the game. And this video should help folks who are for the first time thinking about maybe starting a Devy Fantasy Football League, maybe starting, maybe joining, however you want to look at it. This is really for folks who are looking to get an introduction to Devy Fantasy Football. If you're an experienced Devy player, this probably isn't the video for you, but I encourage you to check out patreon.com/theFFeducator, and that's where you're going to get Devy fantasy football strategy and Devy player value, insight, and analysis. I'll also mention that if you prefer written content over video content, there's a full article that kind of pairs along with this video at si.com/NFL/draft. So let's go ahead here and start with the basics of exactly what Devy Fantasy Football is. Think of it as Dynasty Leagues Plus, all right? Maybe you're an experienced Dynasty player, you've been playing for a few years, you've tried out all the formats, you like it, but you just want a little something more. Well, Devy is that perfect next step to take. It's a combination of traditional NFL fantasy football leagues and college football. It adds in, it's the Saturday to Sunday component. So in these leagues, you manage a roster not only of your NFL players, but you also get to manage college football players. It sounds a little intimidating at first, but I'm telling you, it's so much fun. It makes watching Saturdays so much more fun. Now, like Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues, after each season, you keep your NFL players, you also keep your college players. But when those players go pro, they go to your roster. So that's what makes it fun. You could keep these guys for 3-4 years before they ever make it to the NFL, but it's always so exciting when you're the first one to know about a player value. Well, triple that when it comes to knowing about them from the college perspective. Let's dig a little bit more into what that looks like. Placeholders is the perfect spot to start with understanding exactly what a Devy fantasy football player does. I'm using this word interchangeably. I think it helps for you to hear it as placeholder to start. But then I'm going to start transitioning and using the term Devy player because that's really what I'm talking about here. But Devy player is essentially in a traditional Devy league, and I want to point out before I jump into too much detail here, there's a lot of variations to play Devy leagues. There's not a perfect, quote, standard scoring or standard setting. In this video, I'm going to try to do my best to both explain my standard and also the most common variations. So back to the placeholder concept here. In a traditional Devy league, what I do, college football players, they don't actually score any points for the manager's fantasy football team. Instead, they act as placeholders. Now, there's no set number of Devy players that you have to have in every league. There's a wide variety of leagues. In new to Devy leagues or beginner leagues, and I do run some of these leagues, and I'm going to actually show you an example of one of these leagues here at the end of the video, I actually limit the number of placeholders. I usually do between 3 and 5, and that just kind of helps you feel a little bit more comfortable. You can kind of take the more common or more popular college names, and you don't have to have as much stress or emphasis on the Devy side, so you could feel a little bit more comfortable acclimating to the game. Now, in an industry league, in a more competitive league, you're probably going to have somewhere between 5 and 10, maybe even 12 or 15 available slots. You won't always have to roster 15 players or 12 players. You don't always have to max that number out, but you have the availability to. And in some leagues, you have X number of spots total. So say you have 40 total roster spots, and you could choose to roster 40 NFL players and 0 Devy players, or 30 NFL players and 10 Devy players. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Now, when it comes to the player pool itself, a big question I always get is who's eligible? Is it just seniors? Is it most college football players? Is it Power 5 players? It should be all college football players. Power 5, Group of 5, FCS, it shouldn't matter. In my leagues, all college football players are available to be placeholders on your Devy side. Now, that being said, one of the other questions I get very often is, what about incoming freshmen? Players who have committed to a program, but maybe their school hasn't actually started yet. Their camps haven't actually started yet. They haven't actually started practicing or playing for the team. Those players should count. They should be in the player pool. If they're committed to a college team, they should be in the player pool. Now, some very competitive Devy leagues will include high school players. I traditionally do not include high school players. That is another extra element, and if you're hardcore, if you're competitive, if you get really into Devy leagues and you want to take that next step, that's fantastic. You should feel free to do that, but you don't necessarily have to. That's an extra element, and in a standard Devy league, you wouldn't actually do that. Now, I mentioned it before, but I want to reiterate, I've been using the term placeholder here interchangeably with Devy fantasy football player. For the rest of this video, I will use the term Devy fantasy football player. So, with that being said, the next question is, all right, it's nice and fun to have them on the Devy side, but how do I actually translate that here and make them an asset on my dynasty team that could score points, right? So there's a couple ways that you actually accumulate Devy fantasy football players. Now, traditionally, right, if this is a startup league, then you're going to have the creation of the league and it's going to have the startup draft. And there's a lot of different ways that you can approach your startup draft when it comes to Devy fantasy football. Some leagues will actually throw all the players in one, which means there's one startup draft, and you can draft NFL players, you could draft Devy players, and you just kind of go through the startup draft and just treat them exactly like they're a normal player, and you just add them to your roster. The other common way of doing it is that when you're going through the draft, instead of drafting a player, you can have the ability to draft a Devy pick, right? So say, for instance, you're on the clock, it's the first round, and you have to choose between picking, your favorite running back, or you could choose maybe the Devy 101 pick, the first pick in the Devy draft. Or, once that pick's off the board, the next person up would have the ability to choose, their favorite player or the Devy 102 pick, so on and so forth as you go throughout the draft until all of the Devy picks are taken up. You would want to set how many Devy picks that you're going to have before the startup draft so you don't have an unlimited number of Devy options. And again, that's going to depend on the size of your league. Now, the other opportunity to add a player to your roster, other than, just transferring them when they go pro. Once they go pro, they come on over to your roster. Usually your commissioner will flip that over whenever your league settings flip over for the year. They'll just add them over because they'll be in the system there as a rookie player. So the other option is during an annual Devy draft. Now, most folks playing in the dynasty world, they understand the concept of a rookie draft. Well, think of it just the same way, but you're going to add on to your Devy roster instead of your dynasty roster. So in a Devy draft, you go through and you do a draft. It's usually a reverse standing order, right? However you would determine your draft anyways. And players take turn making their Devy selections, and those players come onto their roster as placeholders. Again, the eligible player pool is that same concept. It's all college players, except obviously you exclude that year the outgoing seniors because they would be on the dynasty side, even if they weren't on a roster, right? So say you had an under-the-radar guy, he broke out, and, everyone's excited about him, but he wasn't on a Devy roster before, he would go over and he would be eligible in the rookie draft, and we'll touch on that in a second. But in the Devy draft, it's only the current college football players for that upcoming year. You would add in the new year of freshmen, but it is a little bit of a depleted player pool, right? Because you had all those Devy players, the sophomores, the juniors, who are still on those Devy rosters, so it's a tougher pool of players to choose from. That's where setting your roster size, setting the number of Devy players available, it kind of affects things. So that's the first way to do it. You could draft them. Now, I also want to point out that when it comes to drafts, I mentioned rookie drafts. In most Devy leagues, you're also going to have a rookie draft. So you do your Devy draft traditionally first. I like to do mine in April before the NFL draft, so like early April, and then the NFL draft happens, and then you do your rookie draft after the NFL draft. That's how I tend to do it. Now, the rookie drafts here would be, again, any Devy player, any college football player coming to the NFL that has not already been rostered through the Devy lens. So it's all the leftover players, if you want to put it plainly. Now, the other way that you could get a Devy player, and this is really the fun, this is where a lot of the action comes in, you could trade for them. They're just like any other player. So you don't have to wait for them to be pro to trade for them. And that makes it a really interesting component. It spices up trades. It adds a whole new trading element to your league. And this is where folks really have fun with them. We know college football player, their values skyrocket up and down, up and down. The value that you can jump on by trading these players around, it makes it really fun, and it makes sharp Devy players, really engaged in their league. Now, one thing I want to point out is that in most Devy leagues, you won't claim them. There's usually not a waiver wire or a bidding process at any point to go ahead and add Devy players through free agency. So you're going to draft them or you're going to trade them, but you shouldn't be claiming them in most leagues. Now, every league has their own rules, but for the most part, you won't be claiming them. Now, I've kind of explained the overview of the leagues, how it works, Devy, the definition of Devy, the components that go into your league, the drafts, but how do you actually get a league started, and what do leagues look like? How do they look different? Now, I want to point out anyone can do it. I know it's a little intimidating, and if you've never started a league before, or if you've only started dynasty leagues before, it might be a little nerve-wracking to start your own Devy league. I'd say start a league with other beginners and understand that there's going to be some growing pains, right? That's the way it is. Now, if you're looking to start a Devy league, the easiest way is just take the dive. Now, maybe don't go a super high buy-in if it's your first time. Again, I like to have Devy-friendly leagues for my patrons, patreon.com/theFFeducator, and those are low buy-in, low stakes leagues, but they're still really fun. So anyone can do it. Take the dive and try it out. Now, you have to pick your platform. Some platforms are easier to work with than others. And so you have to understand the pros and cons of your platform. More customizable platforms tend to be easier because you need to have the ability to have custom players and custom placeholders. Now, if you use a site that has that customizable ability, and the one I'm going to show you here is on MFL, my fantasy league, and it's more customizable. Just very frankly, it's the platform I prefer to use for my Devy leagues. Now, you can use other platforms like Sleeper, you can use ESPN. You may just have to have what I call a tracking system. So if you pick a platform, and even honestly, even with MFL, you should have a tracking system, which is a Google Sheet. It works usually fine. And that I would use just to keep track of all the Devy moves happening. The players, what rosters they're on. Even if it's a platform where it's very easy to visually see, it can really help you in the long term because moving players around can be a little bit confusing. So I suggest that you both pick a website that allows for, like I said, the placeholders to be added to the roster. That's what I prefer to do, but it could still be helpful to use Google Sheets. You could also use Google Sheets to run a live draft board if it is a platform where you're not able to do the draft specifically on the platform. So that's very common use of the off tracking sheet as well. So quickly here, what I want to do is actually show you, just give you an example of what a Devy roster can look like relative to, or what a Devy league can look like, I should say, relative to Dynasty League. And I gotta quickly point out, if you're liking the look of this league, this is the League of Distinguished Characters. It's one of my Dynasty Devy community leagues, and the actual aesthetic of this, the whole credit goes to Scott Frederick. He's a fantastic league mate. He's a fantastic co-commissioner with me, and he makes everything look really pretty. So I'm not going to take any credit for that. And by the way, this is a TV character themed league. So this is a really fun league. This is a Devy league. And you can see right up here, my 2021 league sheet. I'm not going to click on it here, but that is my tracking sheet. It goes right, right off the top. And you can see here, I'm a big community fan. And this is my roster here. Troy and Abed in the end zone. And so this is a short roster league, by the way. There's a few other components to this. Most Devy leagues will be larger, but I wanted to show you this because I think it's a good example of a beginner-friendly one. And so you can see this is my current roster right here. We're in February when I'm doing this video. And you'll see my NFL players here, Dak, Tua, Damian Harris, Miles Sanders. But what you'll also see here is my rookies have already been added. The league year just flipped over, so I was able to have my rookies, my former Devy players, now rookies, added right over. So I had Jalen Waddle on my team, I had Brevin Jordan on my team, and so now I get those players. They're automatically added onto my team. Those are, Jalen Waddle, that's a top 5, top 10 rookie pick. I don't have to use that rookie pick. He's already on my team. Now, this is also a really good example here of, boom, down here, Charleston Rambo. I had to create this custom player. It was Charleston Rambo, Devy, and free agents. He's listed as a free agent just because he doesn't have an NFL team yet. But the point being is, you could see here that this is a placeholder pick. It has a little asterisk next to it, which tells you in MFL that it's a custom player. And I know that I have him rostered. Now, I also here and have the custom placeholder picks for the Devy picks. You don't have to have that, but I like to have that set up. So that's kind of what it looks like. You can see it doesn't look very different necessarily from a dynasty league, right? It looks very similar to a Devy league in and of itself. And you can see here, we'll see on Scott's team, it's a very similar setup as well. He has his Devy players. He has 2 of them because he didn't have as many players come up. So he has Eric Gray. Now for Oklahoma, Chase Garber's there. And he'll have a rookie here that came over from the transfer. So you could see here that it's not all that different, in terms of the logistics of it. Hopefully this introduction video helped you. Like I said, if you prefer written content, there's a pairing article that goes along with this at si.com/NFL/draft. And this was really just for introductory Devy players. If you are looking to take the dive, you want to get rankings, you want to get insight, you want to get strategy, you want to get access to a Slack channel where we're talking about this all the time, patreon.com/theFFeducator. We're looking to grow the game, and we'd be excited to have you join us as a part of the community.